And you are live.
Thank you. Welcome everyone out in whatever we are land, COA TV land. My name is Terry Lomax. I'm chair of the Maritime Advisory Board, and we're here for the November regular meeting of the Maritime Advisory Board. I go down, I typically will go around my screen. It doesn't necessarily be the same screen that you're looking at, and briefly introduce who's on the screen. We have Andrew Fagley, who is a member of the MAB. We have Beth Bellis, our harbor master. We have Stephen Rice from Economic Development for the city. We have our guest, Stephen Vossen from the Naval Academy. He's going to give us an update on the Naval Academy's resiliency program. We have Peter Trogdon, who's a member. We have Jake Iverson from Watermark, who is a regular attendee. We have Debbie Goslin from no longer from Watermark, from her home in Providence, and we have Madeline Adeline at COA TV, and we have our reliable reporter Kimberly Consoli, who keeps our notes and minutes. So with that, I had promised Steve that I would take him first, so I will just let you, Steve, go right ahead and launch into your discussion.
Great, thanks, Terry. I appreciate it. And if it's okay, I'd like to share a screen.
Please do. Madeline, I think she might have to give you permission.
You should already have permission.
Okay, great.
I've got it. Just bear with me 1 second. And if you can let me know.
Lomax can see it. So if I can see it, I assume everybody can.
All right, perfect. So, just like the city of Annapolis, sea level rise and land subsidence are increasingly impacting the operations here at the Academy. The way that we tell the story is we're dealing with increasing amounts of water on the yard, and the effects of climate change as we look out are an existential threat to the Naval Academy. So in 2015, we stood up the Naval Academy's Sea Level Rise Advisory Council. That's a group of folks that includes some faculty, some staff, some of our Naval Facilities Command, our infrastructure people, and we even had some partners from the city of Annapolis that were on the table. And we looked specifically at the science and the projections of where the water was going. In 2020, we subsequently kicked off a major long-term planning effort. It took about a year and a half to develop an installation resilience plan. And what we're looking for is a cohesive plan to address and mitigate the combined effects of sea level rise, land subsidence, groundwater change, storm surge from the different coastal flooding, and for us on the Naval Academy, an inadequate stormwater management system. And we're looking to do that out through the end of the century, so 2100. We knew this was going to be a mix of approaches, and pictured here, and the pictures that you'll see in most of the slides I show you are all actually taken back in the end of October a couple years ago, 29th and 30th, right around Halloween. Folks may remember there was no tropical storm. There wasn't a huge amount of rainfall. It was just some sustained southeasterly wind that caused this flooding on the yard. So for those that were around, I hearken you back to around 2003, and this is the impact of Hurricane Isabel on the Naval Academy. That at the time was a 100-plus-year-old storm, which means for most people to understand less than a 1% chance of it happening. Well, sure enough, it happened to us. And you can see by that top center graphic, all those blue areas, that was what was underwater for us. And you can see these pictures here surrounding it, whether they be outside or the one in the upper right-hand corner inside some of our buildings, we got flooded. But just as bad as the above ground flooding was, it also flooded our utility tunnels underground, and it took a massive recovery effort to pump out the water. The water levels that you saw in that last slide in that October storm were only about 5 inches from flooding out those utility tunnels. which is really one of our Achilles heels right now. And unfortunately, without adaptation, the flooding that you see here by mid-century 2050, this is your average 5-year storm. So this is, 20% chance of every year we're going to see Isabel type effects here at the Naval Academy. And by 2100, the end of the century, this is going to represent for us, we project to be a 1-year storm. So 1%, 100-year storm. So a 1% chance of it happening every year. So we put together this installation resilience plan, and the main deliverables that we wanted from this was a project portfolio and a timeline of these projects. When did we have to do things? What were we going to do at each of those increments? We had several assumptions going in. One, we were not going to relocate the Naval Academy. We like its location. It's near the water, great city of Annapolis, and trying to acquire land in this day and age was going to cost us a lot to get the same bang for the buck. We thought that the security elements were going to be about the same. Our brigade size is about the same. And there, the bottom bullet, we're a national historic landmark. So we had to keep that in mind as we put together this plan going forward. So what we did is we used the projections that our Sea Level Rise Advisory Council put together, and I'll show those in a slide or two here. They happen to align with the Department of the Defense's sea level database, what they have, and other agencies like NOAA. Additionally, we developed this virtual viewer out of what's called LiDAR scanning, the ability to scan down in ground, in water, to create a 3D image of what the academy looks like in the areas that you can't necessarily see all the time. And then we overlaid the water from there. And so we had an idea then, as the water comes up, what was it going to impact first across our entire campus, or what we call the yard. To give you an idea what historically we've looked at, that upper right-hand chart right there is from our tidal gauge. And our tidal gauge is one of the oldest active tidal gauges in the country here on the yard. And it dates back to 1928. And you can see there, just in the last 30 plus years, not only a increasing trend in average tide, average water levels, but it's not even linear. It's continuing to go up a little more than that. Probably easier to explain is this graphic here on the left. We get nuisance flooding or high tide flooding. When you look back in the 4 decades between 1930 and 1969, we had 41 events of this nuisance flooding. So for those people that have been on the campus right near our columbarium, that road floods out. That's the first thing to flood out in the academy. That happened about 41 times over a 40-year period. In the decade of the 90s, it happened 41 times over a single 10-year period. And nowadays, it's happening every year. And by 2050, it's going to happen every high tide. So every day, at least, it's going to happen to the Naval Academy. We're going to get this high tide or nuisance flooding. The lower right corner, when we talk about what we did with those projections, it kind of charts out what it looks like, mean high water or a high tide there now, or when we put this together back in 2022, and how much higher that water was going to be if you look down that vertical axis right there, 0.5 feet higher in 2035, all the way up to 3.5 feet higher in 2100. And then you got to lay on top of that these storms that come, and you can see how that progresses out as you move from left to right. So we use that as an entering argument when we went in to then go in and figure out what are we going to do to fight some of these impacts. We had to explain a lot of this down the road to folks that really are not very familiar with tides. I was the lowest common denominator on the team, so had to put a picture there so it made sense for me what it's like now and what it's like in 2100. So you can see there in the center, excuse me, that's the land. So you look at where the land is, all that gray, you can see where the lowest roads are, the lowest buildings as we get higher and higher, where the seawalls land, and up to Farragut Seawall, which is one that we'll talk about here in just a second. On the left is what the water is like back in 2022. It's not much different right now. So you can see the mean high water there, or a high tide, is just a little bit below our lowest roads. A 5-year storm puts it above our lower buildings. If we don't put the door dams up, we flood, several of our low buildings. In fact, tonight we're putting door dams up because we're going to get tides tonight. We project to be about a foot higher than our lowest roads. You can see a 20-year storm. You can see a 100-year storm. So that 100-year storm on the left there, you can see that is Isabel, and it topped our seawalls. Right, so that's where we are then. Now we look out to 2100, and you can see real quickly that mean high water at 2100 is right around where our seawalls currently are. You add a 5-year storm, it gets way over our seawalls. So if anybody's been on the academy in the last year or so, you can see that we're currently in the process of rebuilding one of our seawalls. Not necessarily because of sea level rise, but because the seawalls only last a certain amount of time. And this one had completely disintegrated. It had huge sinkholes around it. So we're building that, but we're building it, and the initial plan is about 2.5 feet higher than it was before. And you can see that'll take care of a 5-year storm. And then we have the option, we're building the base big enough so that when we extend it down the road, it'll take you almost up to a 50-year storm. So that's an idea of where the water is today and where the water is in 2100. That's a helpful picture for me, and kind of tell the story a little bit. If we look a little further, everybody likes pictures. Here's an example of the academy, an overhead view of the academy. That upper left-hand corner is today. Everything's dry on the average day at high tide. In 2050, you can see there at high tide, which is about a foot higher than today, we got a few little nuisance flooding areas out behind Rickover and behind the library. Keeping the move around in a clockwise circle, by 2065, we got some seriously flooding that's going to close down a lot of the roads and cause some challenges for us to get around. And then by 2100, you got some serious inundation. You got an academy that cannot function. So most people that look at it like this go, hey, Steve, well, you really don't have a problem then really until 2065. And I would say, hey, you're right, except we got to worry about more than just what does it look like at high tide. So what you have here is a 5-year storm, projection of what a 5-year storm looks like. So one that's 20% chance of happening every year. On 2022, up there in the upper left-hand corner, that's what we had roughly last, a couple of years ago in October. And that shut us down. That shut us down several times a day. We had to close our gates. Couldn't move around the roads. Pretty significant stuff. By 2050, you can see already you've got basically what a Hurricane Isabel looked like back in 2003. So that 2050 plus a 5-year storm. By 2100, we don't even want to look at that picture. The building that I work in is about the only thing that's dry there, that and the chapel, way up on the hill. So obviously, if we don't do anything, we're in a heap of trouble, infrastructure-wise. And that's the reason we put this plan together. So the plan, again, it was developed comprehensively, a project portfolio, and a year-to-year execution to cohesively address and mitigate water intrusion that I just showed you. And the 4 areas of Naval Academy that we looked at was the lower yard, which we call the main part of the campus you see here, the upper yard, which is just across the College Creek up to the right-hand corner, out over across the river over at NSA Annapolis, where all the YPs, our yard patrol craft, are, and then out on Greenberry Point. We did similar things. I'm not going to show you all of that, but this general type of picture. And so what you can see here is an overview of the lower yard with all the projects as if they were put in place. You know, so it's a kind of a defense in depth approach here. So this amounts to, you know, one, protecting our utility tunnels. You can see in the upper right hand corner, we got to block the water from coming in those utility tunnels. Raising the seawalls. The number 2 down there on the bottom left hand corner, that's the Farragut seawall we're in the midst of taking care of right now. Down the road, when the water starts to get higher and we have to work, and to give you an idea, we're going to raise all those sea levels based on where we think high tide is going to be at the end of their life. So right now, our sea walls are about 75 years projected to lifespan. So that seawall we're doing around Farragut Field in the bottom left-hand corner, we're going to raise that up about 2.5, 3 feet, and that'll take care of high tide. You ask, well, what about the storms? Behind those seawalls, down the road a little bit, we're going to build earthen berms that kind of raises it a little bit, but makes it a little bit more attractive than just an 8-foot high seawall kind of thing. We're going to elevate some roads, and eventually we're going to have to relocate some critical infrastructure. Some things we're going to abandon because we can't realistically armor them or mitigate some of the things. So as you can see here, this plan for the lower part of the yard right here has short-term impacts, mid-term impacts, kind of that, or projects 5 to 15 years, and then long-term projects, 15 years and out. Do we have the money for all these? No, it's not. This is not a money-based project portfolio. When we sell this to big Navy and big Department of Defense, we're just showing them, you have to take care of these things in this time span, or the water is going to cause a toll. So if we don't do these things, we're taking on increased risk. Our plan here is a 40-year execution plan. So it's expensive, don't get me wrong, but if we bite off a little bit at a time, it's a little bit more palatable. But it's a 40-year plan between now and roughly 2065 to get it done. Let me show you some of the the before and after of what we're looking at. Just across from the harbor here, or downtown Annapolis, in the upper left-hand picture, you can see Halsey Fieldhouse, which most people are fairly familiar with, and over on the right-hand side, Farragut Field. And what I'm showing you is high tide in 2100 without any mitigating circumstances. Pretty ugly picture. Halsey Fieldhouse is underwater. The roads are underwater. Not a good look. On the lower pictures is what happens when we put those adaptation things, whether they be short-term, mid-term, or long-term. So in the lower left, we put a seawall in on the lower in the short term. In the midterm, we're gonna do things like change the drainage and raise the drainage of the fields and raise the roads. And then in the long term, those blue circles, we're going to build those berms. And in the case of off of Farragut Field, that lower right-hand corner, that number 10 there, we're installing a wave attenuation system, potentially doing these things. These are all possible project portfolios that we would like to consider executing. As we move across the yard a little bit, you can see on the left-hand side there, Santee Basin, where we park our sailboats. Obviously, no docks there anymore if we don't do anything by 2100. On the lower left-hand corner, you can see what happens when we raise some of those piers. The blue number 12. In the case of number 9 there, you can see that is Robert Crown Sailing Center. We're going to have to move it. We're going to have to move it kind of across into that field behind a berm to keep that safe. We can't armor it. We're going to have to redo some of those things. On the right-hand side, you see kind of looking from north to south at some of the academic buildings. In the short term, that number one, close off the utility tunnels, change the drainage on the fields over there, number 6, raise some of those roads and some of those put some berms in. So again, a chance to get there, but it's a long-term 40-year project to get us there. One more picture graph here. This is up at the upper yard. So the big hospital point and the athletic fields, and some examples there. Again, you can see there that we'd be raising the seawalls in the short term. Put a berm behind them, just the same kind of thing. We probably raise the fields again. But in this case, if you look over on the left-hand side where that number 9 is, that's where the columbarium is. But we don't have a means to protect that in the long term. So we're going to have to move it, and we're going to give that area back to the sea. That's going to become a living shoreline. Similarly, if you look above that, the blue number 9 towards the upper left-hand corner, historically, that was a drainage area that the water from the upper hill went down into College Creek. And we fought with Mother Nature. Well, Mother Nature is going to fight back now. And instead of trying to build a huge seawall that protects that, we're just going to extend that road, number 11, and the bridge all the way up over that new water. So an example of how we're going to abandon things, you basically have to either adapt them, armor them, or abandon them down the road. And then finally, to give you, this is not meant to be a huge eye chart or anything, but this is kind of how we have things set out. It's a requirements-based execution plan. Again, what do I mean there? We may not have the money. We're just showing everybody this is when we have to do these different types of projects, from planning to programming for money to actually executing them to get everything done. Otherwise, we're taking risk along the way. And we think it's important. It's an existential threat. If we don't do what's on this slide and on the next slide, the Academy won't be here like it is today. We think it's a national landmark that's worth preserving. We think that the effort we have put behind it and the idea of relocating the Naval Academy somewhere else is going to be actually more expensive than what it would cost to do these things. I think it's important to note when you look at this that it was based on the sea level rise projections from about 4 or 5 years ago. That Sea Level Rise Advisory Council at the Naval Academy, we've taken upon us that every 5 years we're going to update these projections. We're in the middle of doing that right now, and in fact, our projections right now are pretty doggone similar to what we thought they were going to be 5 years ago, which is a little bit of good news. It hasn't gotten really too much worse. We took kind of an intermediate approach. If anybody has looked at what the projections are, there's some forgive me, but folks that don't think the sea level is going to rise, and deniers. There's some folks that think it's just going to be kind of linear. There's some folks that, the sky is falling. They think nothing's ever going to be done and it's going to be off the charts. We took kind of a gradual upslope, assuming that we're going to be some sort of things that was done by the nations of the world to start mitigating some of the CO2 and everything else we're throwing into the system. So we think we have a fairly high confidence level of an area that we're going to be in, and we're building towards that. But we're going to continue to look at this every 5 years. So quite honestly, that is the quick and dirty of what we're doing here at the Naval Academy, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Harry, I think you're muted.
Steve, thank you very much. I particularly enjoyed or appreciated the pictorial depictions, because I think that really puts it into perspective much more than a sort of a bar chart to see where all the blue is likely to take place over the ensuing years. And I think almost all of us on the board were here during Isabel and saw the amount of catastrophic impact that Isabel had, just from simple. It wasn't wind. It wasn't so much rain. It was just the rise in the level of the bay, which actually brings me to one sort of question / point. It appears that, and when lay people or non-bay oriented people ask me about sort of what happens on the bay in addition to just normal tides, I'd be interested to see if my analogy is wrong, is that when you get a southeast wind in particular, particularly a strong wind, it's a bit like putting a cork in a bathtub, because there's nowhere for the water to go once it piles up against the outlet at Norfolk, and yet the Susquehanna obviously keeps dumping water into the bay. Am I off base on that, or is there a different phenomena that I'm not thinking about?
No, Terry, you're exactly right. And I would say it's even worse than that. That water is not only stopping water from getting out, that wind, if it's sustained enough, which is what we saw 2 years ago at the end of October, it just doesn't stop it. It's that wind is forcing the water up the bay, actually. So you're exactly right when you explain that. A lot of people think the flooding is primarily from heavy rains, the sea level rise. That's not really the case. You get the localized flooding where the storm drains can't keep up with it. But when we see the water rise, it's typically not a whole lot from the rain itself, but from the wind, as you point out, stopping the water from exiting the bay or actually driving the water up. Yeah.
I suppose, tongue in cheek, one solution is we just widen the mouth of the bay.
Well, that's not going to stop the wind from driving it up, though. You can make that thing as big as you want. That big meteor that fell on, many millennia ago. Perhaps it could be bigger, but yeah.
So you also answered my other question, and I'm going to let go around the screen with everybody. I was curious. I was going to ask you what the construction was that was obvious along Farragut Field in 2023. But you've answered that question, that it was already needed to replace a portion of that bulkhead along there, and it wasn't the start of a bigger project. It was just being adapted to accommodate the bigger project.
No, exactly right. And the way we explain this, and it's not rocket science or anything like this. If you're going to Navy, if you're going to commit to it, you really got to commit, because if we build the wall, or however we decide to do this, only 90% of around the academy, water's got its way. You got to do the whole thing. Otherwise, the water's going to find a way in. It's pretty determined.
Well, that leads, I guess, to a follow-up question, and that is, I know, and I was glad to hear that as far back as 2015 that you've been working with the city. What is the status with the coordination with the city and the city's plans, particularly around City Dock, because all of a sudden you go above the bridge and the water comes in above the others, farther up from City Dock, and we got the same problem. It's just coming around the end of the wall, so to speak.
Yeah, so one thing, we're looking at a little bit different time horizons, the Naval Academy and the city. But we actually are coordinating. One, we're making sure, at least when we started this effort, are we using the same data, right? And if not, why not? As long as they're talking to each other, we know that. But when they planned the City Dock thing, one of the ways the water was going to be dispersed from the City Dock area was going to potentially flood the academy. Which would have caused us to have to probably seal off kind of the western side of the academy down there, a walkway in, and brick that over. So we've been working hand in hand with the city in that regard. to make sure that, we're not flooding them and they're not flooding, and the Annapolis isn't flooding the Naval Academy as we continue to move along these things. So we're talking fairly closely.
Well, that's good to hear. So let me, Andy, you're the first one. You're at the top of my screen on this in this presentation. So do you have any questions for Steve? You need to unmute, but when you ever get to it, there you go.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for giving us the presentation. I don't have any questions. Thanks.
All right. Actually, Stephen, you have any questions? You've probably been involved in this anyway.
Oh, I don't have any questions. I appreciate the presentation, though. Thank you.
Debbie?
I don't have any questions either, but it's
Wow,
really...
that's a Peter. I'm sure. Oh, you are. This is your second time around to hear this.
Yeah, yes, I heard Stephen speak to the Anne Arundel Maritime Board, and it's great presentation. And my concern, like Terry asked, is that coordination with the city, that timing, and are you using the same data and the same height? As they've got the city plans these floating walls, so they've got walls that pop up and float up, and where do they connect, and how does that fit with the Navy's plan, so we don't have water going around these walls?
Right, and I think we're both looking at the same challenges, so we are coordinating along the way. That some of those pop-up walls are well over, my knowledge of them are more in the along Ego Alley and out at the front there, which won't have a huge impact on the Naval Academy. So I'm not the guy that's smart and actually does that coordination, but I know we are doing it with the city, because one of the ladies that I work with pretty regularly is constantly talking about it.
Anything else, Peter?
Well, my concern, of course, is that where that wall stops at the Fleet Reserve or at 110 Compromise, wherever that wall stops happening, that water can come around that wall past the market house and come all the way back into the Naval Academy.
Yep.
That all seems real to me after seeing the flooding we did this weekend.
It is.
Compromise was flooded again, and there was not too much happening, but downtown was impacted. But it's going to get a lot worse, as you know, and the city's got to find a way to shut that water off past the hotel or at the Yacht Basin or somewhere. Anyway, that's a big challenge, but thank you. Sounds great.
Jake, any questions?
Thanks, Steve, for the presentation. Just one question. The seawall near the visitor center, Naval Academy Visitor Center, that in your projections, that was 0 to 5 years. Do you have a timeline on when that work will be?
So that's when the water would be no, that's not even close to being funded right now. So that's, again, that would make a 0 to low risk if we did it then. That's not on the immediate horizon. I will tell you what we're looking at really in that area right now is stormwater management. Right now, our biggest challenge down there is some of these pipes around here are still original, still terracotta, and far too small to handle the volume. So a lot of these areas, we're going to be replacing the piping with bigger piping. And then, you build walls around everything, you're going to need pump stations, right? And so we will have a way to do that. But I don't anticipate that seawall being restructured in the next 5 or plus probably 5-10 years at all. I know we've got some designs that aesthetically make it a little bit more attractive. I don't know. I have not seen how they've been coordinated yet with the town, but the funding's a ways out on that. We're a little bit more in survival mode right now, closer in the academy and other spots.
Got it. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Mike, obviously you made it from Waldorf without a fender bender. So well, thank you for joining us. This is Mike Tomasini, who's also another member of the MAB.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, for the presentation. It was great, and some of the work's obviously already started. There have got to be other places where the Navy has met some of these challenges sooner than it's come to Annapolis. Are they having success with wave attenuation, with raising walls and installing pumps? Is there a
I will, Mike, thanks for the question. I will offer, we see ourselves as the pilot program for the Navy, quite honestly. The only area that I'm aware of that this has been addressed to some extent in the bigger department of the Navy is with Paris Island. They had some challenges down there. But if you go down to Norfolk, it's a much bigger challenge down there. We're the first folks that have done this amount of study to holistically look at it. And it's not this is not, what I showed you is not a perfect plan yet. There's still some things that we have to do, borings and other things to make sure, can the land even hold up a berm? Is this the right solution? But at least it's a good approach to plan for over the next 30 or 40 years. So we have been marketing ourselves as the pilot program for the Navy, because this is going to happen to a lot of bases around, or not just around the nation, but around the world for the United States Navy.
All right, Steve, I think that was all of the questions. I do really appreciate you taking the time this evening to join us. As Peter had touted you from the earlier meeting with the county, it was absolutely worthwhile hearing from you and having an idea what the Navy is doing. And I look forward to actually an update in the next year or so as to when the first time you get some funding to actually get started.
Sounds good. I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. Take care.
Likewise to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to our relatively short agenda. We have minutes from October that Kimberly had prepared. I had looked at them. I didn't have any changes. I don't know if anybody has any comments. Let me actually do a head count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we have 5. Is there a motion to adopt the October minutes? Mr. Trogdon has moved to adopt them. Is there a second? Thank you, Debbie. And all in favor to adopt the October minutes?
Aye.
All right, that's 5 of 5, Kimberly. The next item is Debbie. Did you have anything to fill us in on from the county MIAV in October?
No, I did not make it, Terry. I'm sorry.
And Duncan, who is not here, is going to be here, attending in November. I sent him the information for it, so he should be able to do that. Economic development, Stephen.
Good evening. I will try to be quick. Our citywide commercial vacancy rate for October was 5.8%. We had 3 new businesses that opened in the city and 1 business that expanded or relocated. Economic development provided assistance to 39 businesses during the month. We also had 2 ribbon cuttings. One was for And Creative, and the second was for Perpetual Skin. Also, our economic gardening program is currently taking applications. December 1st is the application deadline. During October, the third week of October, it was Business Appreciation Week. So we visited 13 businesses and we surveyed the businesses. We called them, I guess we'll call them site visits. We wanted to show appreciation for them, of course, supporting economic vitality in the city, providing jobs and investing in our community. And we, were pretty active during that week. We're busy. I don't know what's going on, but we're busy and things don't seem to be slowing down, even though we're on the cusp of the holidays. So the last thing is we have a couple things that we're kind of promoting. Small Business Saturday and Shop Local and those sorts of things. That's on our front burner right now. And we have some marketing, social media stuff going out, and the mayor's going to be doing some stuff as well. So that's it.
All right. Thank you for that. The next item, I sent everybody a copy of Beth's, and I sent it as the meeting was starting. I hadn't realized it hadn't gone to you. Beth's update on the various street end parks, and it's pretty comprehensive as to all of the various projects. I only had actually, and also about the Truxton Park, Stray Electric Current, and the city dock. I only had a couple of questions, actually, and I'm looking to see which one it was. Beth, what I see that DNR decided that Thompson Street was no longer eligible for waterway improvement grant due to insufficient water depth, proximity to another DNR funded pier, and does not meet the criteria because it's too far from boater amenities. What if anything, is the city planning to do with respect to Thompson Street at this point? If anything.
Well, they are planning to do something, and I would say Director of Public Works spearheaded that sort of stopgap to put the new boards in, and then he also put something in the capital improvement program. Gosh, I don't think that my printout has his. He added some comments, and I think I missed them. So I might have to go back and look. So I think that Burr Vogel, if my memory serves me, I think that Burr has provided for, let's see. Oh, here we are. The city will have to fund the necessary stormwater mitigation. The project is included in the capital improvement program, and DPW did already hire a contractor that replaced some boards. I do think there was like a little bit more.
So
I might have to dig back in my notes.
Was there anything? I mean, it looked like that one of the reasons was insufficient water depth, but I didn't see anything in the comments that anybody was addressing any, dredging in that area.
So essentially, DNR's take was that this is a community pier, and it would not be like something that would support boaters at large. And so they essentially said, like, this is not. So waterway improvement funds are for everyone that pays their 5% excise tax, and they felt strongly that this is a community pier, and this is not what waterway improvement funds are meant for. So they sort of said, like, no, this is not what we want to do with this is not appropriate use of the funds.
And I can understand that rationale, but But if we're doing these, whether they're stopgap or longer term improvements, if it's a community pier, is the use of that quote, and I'll call it a community pier for description, does it then not require any dredging for water depth because it's not really going to be a public access?
I mean, if it was for public access, then we could consider dredging. And if it is not, if it is considered like just for community access, then the city would have to pay for that dredging. But essentially, like, we would have to look at who's using this and what is the purpose, and then whose funds should be used for this. And so it gets a little bit complicated. But I mean, I think that the people at Thompson Street, I mean, I think that they deserve an improvement there. But I don't think that waterway improvement funds can be used there. I understand exactly what DNR is saying. It's sort of a community pier. It's not, you're not going to anchor out a big boat if you're from Canada, because essentially their main focus is like, is there a grocery store nearby? Are you going to a provision because you're going to like cruise the loop? Like, essentially they're saying like, this is for local people. This is not for transient boaters. And I can't say I can argue with that.
Well, and my question was really more towards it. Is the water depth adequate for it as the community pier that is being used for, knowing that we're not the waterway funds aren't going to improve it for the transient from Canada, but the depth remain adequate for the use of canoes, kayaks, or whatever being launched there?
I mean, I would say no. I don't know how the neighborhood feels. I think it's very, very shallow. I mean, I think the people that live there may be happy with it, but it's not a usable waterway in terms of boating. You might want to go like sit on it and look at the water. You may be able to go sit on it and catch a white perch, but I don't think it's a usable waterway in terms of boating. That's my
We'll wait 5 years for Steve Austin's projections to come true, and it'll dredge itself.
Maybe, yeah.
It won't dredge itself. It'll just the water level will just rise. All right. Any questions for Beth? You all may not have looked at her report, but you can certainly take a look. And I've asked her to be sure and send it to everybody when she sends it to me, because I did not forward it until a bit late this evening. So you might not have had a chance to take a look at it. I didn't see, other than the question about Thompson Street, I didn't see anything much different than what we'd already been hearing about as we've been going along. So I didn't raise any, I wasn't going to dwell on it very long, but anybody have any questions for Beth about that, or anything else? Beth, Mike.
Just real quick, it wasn't on the agenda for discussion tonight. I just happened to catch the corner of my eye this morning when I was scanning the Capitol. The port wardens are meeting next Tuesday, and they're considering an application from the Wardour Improvement Association to do a project at the end of Tolson Street, which I thought this time last year or just slightly before that was adopted by the city as a street end park. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. That's news to me. I have not seen this news.
Yeah, Mike, and I don't remember that. The project that they were proposing, I think, was a living shoreline, wasn't it, Beth?
That's the way it came through on the,
right,
in the paper too.
I don't remember Tolson Street as being a topic of a street end access. I mean, it might be a street end park with a living shoreline.
Right.
You know, I mean, with the park side on the land, but not street end access, just a street end park.
But is the land at the end of Tolson Street, is that city owned property or is that Wardour owned property?
I've never heard that as a city owned street end, but I could weigh in on that after I do some research, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Got me.
Yeah,
Again, it's not something that I've ever heard mentioned as being a city street end facility. I'll call it facility park or access, either one. And if it's not city owned, and it sounds like all Wardour is doing is putting in wants to put in a living shoreline and just leave it as a street end access, street end park with a bench or something, I guess. So
Yeah. So my question was more, if it is a city park, is the living shoreline then potentially taking away
right.
access to paddlecraft and dinghies and that kind of stuff?
I mean, at the end of the day, at the risk of tooting my own horn, I would say I do want to call attention to the improvements being made at Cheston Street. We're super happy about that.
Yeah, that's good.
There was a picture, for those of you that hadn't seen it yet, there's actually a picture of those street end, that improvement, in what Beth sent me, with the new facility there, and it does look very nice. Also, a perfectly nice flat day with a blue sky that makes it look really nice. All right, Beth, while we're on the same, on your items, the only other thing that was on your for you was, if we making any movement on either the house barge situation, and I'll call situations.
So this is sort of a difficult conversation, but I would say that the mayor specifically is exploring new legislation that would legalize house barges. But in order for these types of homes to be a safe place for dwelling, particularly if they are Airbnbs, the city would need to develop standards for inspection, for planning and zoning, and fire marshal, and the harbor master. So the city council would have to consider plumbing requirements, short-term lease rental changes. The council would have to come to consensus on the size, the location, the use of the barges, and the fire marshal would have to agree that in the event of a fire or a medical emergency, that they could rescue occupants and minimize damage to surrounding property. And then, since the owners of the house barges don't pay property taxes, stakeholders may also see that something that they would also have to weigh in on. So we have studied many municipalities, and we have studied how many people have felt about house barges in different cities around the world. And if you Google house barge, most of what you will find is catastrophic fires and very concerning things. It's not to say that house barges couldn't be a good thing, but there are many things that the city would have to consider. And I think we need to be very careful about how we change our city code to permit these things, because there are many things that could be bad about them.
All right,
well, Mike's smiling.
We need to just stay tuned, and when the if and when legislation is introduced, it'll meander its way through the normal commentary and review process, including coming to this board, I guess.
I hope.
Neither Scott nor Alan Miller are here tonight. Scott gave me a brief update on the I think first of all, I have listed it as the Maryland Maritime Hall of Fame. I think we have are getting away. Well, let me back up. There is a committee, a steering committee of sorts, that consists of Scott and Alan and Mike Tomasini, myself, Mary Ewenson, and Dick Franyo, and we had an initial Zoom call a couple of weeks ago that sort of kicked around ideas. And I think in the big scheme of things, the concept is not to pursue a brick and mortar type concept. that would essentially replicate or duplicate or overlap with the Annapolis Maritime Museum, but rather to try to integrate and making it more of a heritage and recognition type program, and not and get away from the idea of a hall of fame, which tends to conjures up more athletic connotation. And Mary provided some information, excuse me, from the for contacts at the Convention and Visitors Bureau who may have some ideas. And the short summary is that Scott is going to call us another steering committee meeting once we've sorted through, sort of digested some of the thoughts that we kicked around at the first steering committee meeting. So just stay tuned. But we are moving away from the concept of a brick and mortar or a Hall of Fame type of concept, more to a recognition, a program for recognition of maritime individuals who have contributed to the maritime locally, more locally than statewide or even countywide. So basically, stay tuned. It is taking the normal bureaucratic path. And with that, unless somebody has any questions about it, the only other thing that we are looking at is our December meeting would normally fall on the 19th, which is the Tuesday before Christmas weekend. Typically, that is two things happen. One is that is usually not the most attended night of the Christmas holidays. So we typically would move it to the week before. But I also note that some of the members have other committee meetings and things that they attend. So I'm wondering if there's a thought that we would, the 12th would be the Tuesday, whether we moved it to the 13th or 14th to get it off of the Tuesday conflicts with some people. Rick Nelson, Annapolis Sailing School, has agreed to host. We've been with Annapolis, Port Annapolis in the past few years, but I tend to like to try to move it around just so everybody gets a flavor for or a feeling for some of our other businesses or our other clubs. So I'm going to take Rick up on his, and assuming that he can do it on a Wednesday or Thursday, the 13th or 14th, and I'll start with Andy. Andy, are you even going to be in town?
I promise not to be.
All right. Peter, are you likely to be in town?
Yes.
Good. You have any heartburn with doing it on Wednesday the 13th or Thursday the 14th?
No.
Mike, any heartburn with the 13th or 14th? You're on mute.
If we do it, the 14th would be better for me.
All right. Debbie, any thought on the 14th, since that seems to be best for Mike?
Yeah, the 14th works. I think the 13th, there's another event in town that some of us might be going to.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that, but I guess I did get my invitation. All right. I will reach out to Rick Nelson and see if we can't do it the 14th. I don't see why we would not be able to. We will plan on the 14th. But I will obviously send out a notice well in advance on that. I will try to reach out to him tomorrow, but I don't know what his holiday plans are.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
It's good. Maybe we can start a new tradition. All right. Andy, anything further for the good of the order?
No, not at this time. Just what we talked about earlier.
Okay. Beth, anything?
No, I don't think so.
Stephen? Jake? Debbie?
Nope.
Peter?
Yes, happy Thanksgiving.
That's true. Happy Thanksgiving. It's 2 days away. Stay dry. Mike, anything?
No, just gonna say what Peter said. He beat me to it.
Well, next time you got to move yourself over on the screen. You'd have been next. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Peter moved to adjourn, Andy seconded, which is probably his last opportunity this fiscal year. So all in favor?
Aye.
Everybody have a great Thanksgiving. Kimberly, thanks for your help. Madeline, thanks for your help. And Stephen, Jake, thanks for joining us. And everybody have a good